It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Christine Kane, and we're going to be discussing her new book, The Soul Sourced Entrepreneur An Unconventional Success Plan for the Highly Creative, Secretly Sensitive, and Wildly Ambitious. Christine, it is truly an honor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, this is the very first time you and I are meeting today, Christine. I know you're going to be brand new to most of my viewers and listeners. So let's kick off our conversation by having you share a bit of the Christine Kane origin story. For somebody meeting you for the first time today, what do they absolutely need to know about your journey?
What they absolutely need to know is nothing, because I don't want to
Come
assume
on,
anyone has to know anything.
superpowers, special abilities, whatever you want to throw in there.
Well, what I would say in terms of since you mentioned the book, for me, everything started with when I was out of college. I had stepped into what would be considered a very traditional role. I got a job at Ogilvy and Mather, which, made all the adults around me very proud of me. And I was in a cubicle and I discovered I hated it, every part of it. And I liked all the people there, and I just didn't like the setup. And at through many different various books I read and finally overcame the fear, I quit to become a musician. And that one terrifying choice just simply changed the whole trajectory of my life. And I thought I was going to go into music and, suddenly be discovered. And what I had to do was step into the music world and become essentially, didn't without knowing it, an entrepreneur. So I learned how to write songs. I learned how to play music, and then I learned how to be my own business as a record label. And in that time, which was the following many number of years, I released 7 CDs and a DVD. And as I got better at business and I started hiring coaches and I got more clear and more tuned into what power actually is, people started coming to me and asking me to help them. And I wasn't any kind of musician who stood on stage and, wrote inspirational songs to go be better or anything like that. It's just people, I think, started to tune into, they knew I was doing the work at some level. And so they'd wait for me backstage. I started talking with people more deeply. And then I started hosting retreats where I live here in Asheville. And that kind of blended in over a few years. I started to realize, oh, this is something I love doing. And that eventually evolved into the business I now have, which is called Uplevel U, which is a coaching company. And I left the music world behind and then created this. And this grew into a pretty big company unexpectedly.
Well, I like what you said in terms of you all of a sudden realized you were kind of an entrepreneur or you were in business for yourself. That's been one of the most fascinating parts of working with authors for the past decade is, they're excited just like any creative person to do the work, make the thing that they're super passionate about. But when it gets to the other side of actually making money and promoting and marketing, it's like, oh, I have to do some of that too. I don't just to get to sit in my writing space and make all this great content. I feel like that's sort of the surprising part of the journey for many creatives where they're like, oh, I actually have to make money with this. That means I need skills or teams or something that I don't already have. I'm curious to hear about in terms of like, the evolution of you mindset wise, so you're at Ogilvy, I'm assuming working in some kind of an advertising marketing space. Is that what
It
you're
was
doing?
it was Ogilvy PR, so it was in Washington D.C.
Okay, so you go from that to being a musician, every parent's dream. They're like, "Oh, you're gonna be a musician. This is fantastic." But then you go from there to creating your own coaching company. So I'm curious in terms of mindset and giving yourself permission, like what did that look like through the years as you kind of went along the journey?
That is such a large question, and let me do my best to sort of
Give us
distill
the
it.
elevator pitch version of that
Yeah,
answer.
well, I mean, we talked about who your listeners are. That decision to quit my job was truly the most terrifying thing I think I've ever done. I was dating a guy in college who and I was sort of on that trajectory. He is now a very, very well-known Wall Street executive who's been on, been on TV, that kind of thing. And I think I had sort of anchored my soul to the typical female out of college path of like, he'll take care of me. And I really truly believe what my book is titled, The Soul Sourced, that something inside of us calls us out of our slumber. And I think that's been the path for me all along, was just I knew that wasn't going to work. I was so deeply depressed. I was bordering on kind of, I would say, almost suicidal. And I know you've talked about that that true unhappiness with people on your podcast before, but everything in me just started saying, I can't do this path anymore. And so they actually promoted me at Ogilvy. And on the day they promoted me, I left. And what I looked at it was this moment of, are you going to keep going on this path that you know you don't want to do, and your ego is now saying, look, they promoted me. And I just shut it all down. And I didn't just jump right into music because I wasn't good enough at that point. So I went and got like a waitressing job. I moved out of town. I got all kinds of letters from my family telling me I was going to fail. Like, it wasn't it was not just like, and then I put on my wings and I soared. It was a very painful, I would say, 3 years where I was scared most of the time. I was trying to argue with my parents most of the time, but I also felt more alive than I had ever felt in my life. And that, I think, was what kept me going, was feeling scared but alive felt so much better than feeling certain but dead, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that. So many of us, especially when we achieve some milestone in our 20s or 30s where our friends and our family like, you have arrived, you're making money, it's great. And you go home at the end of the day and you're like, I hate my life. This is like a soul sucking experience where I just rather stay in bed than get up. And our friends and family, they see the glitzy, shiny things. They don't see maybe the toll it's taking on us personally behind the scenes, and so
Yeah.
I can
And
relate
I
to you.
wasn't glitzy and shiny at Ogilvy, by the way. I was working in a cubicle. I'm going to be
Sure.
very, I don't want to, because God forbid one of my former bosses looks at this.
No, and I mean
She,
more in the sense, to people outside of your experience, like, oh, you work for this great marketing or advertising firm, you're being successful, so they just think
it
it's all
looks
all
good
great,
on paper. They just,
right?
at that time, the adults around you want to be able to put you in the box that makes all their friends nod and say, okay, she's doing the right thing.
Y-
And then after that, it was like, well, she moved to Asheville and she's waitressing. And I think she says she's becoming a musician, but I think she's done some open mic nights. Like, that's not something parents feel good about. And
Right.
what the gift of that, though, was being a disappointment to everyone in my life meant that I had, like, there was some burning down of ego that happens in that moment that you cannot convince anybody how valuable it is. But it was such a key thing to go through because I became the disappointment of everybody, and then I lived through it. And when I started to rise from the ashes and go on tour, and my parents didn't even know when my first CD came out, and then they came to a show, and there were people there, and they saw the CD, like, it was a thing, and then they kinda were like, "Oh, we're her parents," like that. It was this shift, but I no longer needed their approval at that point, and so it was not anymore, like, the thing I needed. And again, you can't convince anybody that that is worth going through, but that is the deepest path anyone, I think, can go through, is to let all of that burn so that you can find who you are really truly meant to be.
Yeah, I would say, pursuing our dreams or places that we feel called, sometimes it takes burning our old life down, jumping off the cliff. And I feel like you mentioned a 3-year period. There's always that kind of deconstruction period where you sort of have to find new friends. You're trying to figure out, how do I fit into this new, because, we're so defined by our jobs and so many of our professional relationships. And when we step away from that, all of a sudden, not only are our family and friends trying to figure out who we are, we're trying to figure out who we are. Now, when you get 10, 15, 20 years down the road and you've been on this trajectory where the choices you made led to other successes and more growth and other things, people are like, man, that was great that you did that. But in the moment at that time when you're broke and trying to figure out, why am I doing this, and trying to find a path forward, it doesn't feel super great. But at the same time, it's that being willing to kind of take the leap off the cliff and kind of burn that old life down that brings the success that you find later. Like for myself, I had a very successful career at software companies, I completely jumped ship and went into marketing in the Christian book space. And, 10, 11, about 10 years later, I'm very successful in that space. But there was a period of about 3 years that was super awful because you leave everything that you had set up in your
A-
career to do
And you have
something
to
else.
learn to trust, your intention and your vision. And no book or anything can prepare you for that.
Right. Very true. Very true. In terms of, I want to pull on the thread of your coaching company in terms of like who are the types of clients or ideal people that you serve? Because you'd mentioned it, but we didn't touch on kind of the space that you operate in.
So my clients tend to be solo. Well, when they start with me, they tend to be solo entrepreneurs. Several of my clients have gone on to create companies, and but they tend to be solo entrepreneurs. They tend to border on, I would say, more of the creative side, but it doesn't mean they're artists. It just means that they are more right brain in how they do things. And what I teach them is, I think what draws them in a lot of times is the way I have experienced business and the way I teach business is from this, the idea that when we have a business, there are two tracks in that business. Everyone wants to talk about the strategy of business, strategy, sales, systems, team building, all that kind of stuff. But what the way I teach it is there's a strategy track, and that's very important, but there's also the soul track, which is that unnameable, softer side, who you are, all the things that get in the way, all of the voice that you have, the things that make you you that I think oftentimes will block the strategy track. And so the people who are drawn to me see that and go, oh, wow, I didn't even know that that was a part of what was going on for me. And then once they start understanding that, they realize that, oh, I can do this business thing. Because I think a lot of them sell themselves short. They charge what they see other people charging. They never step into their power. And what I try to teach them is how to be clear, how to step up, and how to really own that business from all of you.
Before we get into more of the content from the book, I want to hear why this was the right season for this book to come to life for you. Because obviously, my whole life is consumed with authors and books, and I feel like sometimes there's like a fullness, like somebody's kind of pregnant with a book, and it's just the time for it to come out. Other times, they've just reached a place in their career where they write the book they wish they'd have 10 or 20 years ago when they were starting out. So I'm curious for you and your journey, why were you ready to write this book, or why did this book come to life?
Well, let me first say that my book came out in the year of a pandemic, the most political unrest ever, and it was released on the same day as Obama's book. Like there's so many things. I'm like,
You had
I
some
don't
stiff
know about right
competition.
timing. I know I'm not sure this was right timing, but okay. So, but why this book got written? I tried. I've been in many masterminds with many brilliant coaches. I've been told to write a book because my company is called Up Level You. I've been told to write a book called Up Level and map out the 5 quick steps and all that kind of stuff. And I tried, starting in about 2014, I tried to write the perfect strategic book. And every part of my whole being kept saying, this is not bringing me joy. And I was bored to death. And finally, I just sat down and I said, and several of my clients kept coming to me and saying, Christine, I know you don't speak about this publicly, but this whole soul track thing needs to be out there for people like me. And when I started to write, when I really wrote what I wanted to write, it was about these internal challenges that we each go through because none of us is wired to be an entrepreneur when we start. And maybe you hear stories about people who seemed like they were wired. But most of us, when we start a business, we do it because we love what we're doing. And we're like, hey, I'll try this. I'll just throw this out there. Or, hey, like you just said, those people who have all content and then they realize they have to market. And so I just started to write the stories of what it was like to be a musician and have to have a business and have to make decisions and turn down record deals and all the things that the whole world might say, why'd you do that? But as an entrepreneur, there's something else there. And that's what I wanted to write about. And I can't say I ever felt like this is the time for this book. I've never been someone who has that kind of conviction, but I have this deep trust that if something in my being is saying this isn't right, I have to trust that and do the thing I know. But I didn't set this out there thinking, I know I'm going to, kick ass and take names for now and forevermore. It just happens that it's been speaking to the right people and done very well.
Well, I think Marie Kondo would be very happy that you didn't write the book that like sapped her, didn't give you joy. You threw that one away, so to speak. But I like that you bring that up because, in terms of coaching and working with authors, one of the things I often tell them is like, look, I want you to write a book that you can feel good about and that you're going to be overjoyed to talk about this book for the next 5 to 10 years. Because if you're writing a book like you were saying that everybody is telling you you should write, but it's not the book that you want to write and you just want to forget about it after you finish writing it, you're not going to be able to sell that book because if the author isn't excited about a book, the reader isn't going to be excited about the book either. So I
Yeah.
think that's an important lesson that the creative pursuit of even a business book, an entrepreneurship book, whatever, it does need to bring the author joy for them to be their authentic self when they share about it. And so because when you're writing them, I feel like when you're writing a message, you are signing up to be the poster boy or poster girl for that message for the foreseeable future. And if you don't want to wear that hat, you probably shouldn't bring that book to life.
Very true. And I had a lot of people, a lot of publishers. My agent fell in love with this book. Like when I sent him the proposal, he jumped right in and said, "Oh my God, this is my wife. This is so many people that I know. This is so many of the authors." And then when we were talking with publishers, there was so many people who said this audience doesn't exist. And it really tested my own faith. But and it was like, wait, I have served thousands of these people in my coaching. They do exist. I promise you that. And in some ways, it was good for me because you know how you said people create content and then they realize they have to market it. What my agent then pushed me to do was really, really work on talking to who is this person and nailing that person down so they understood, they could see themselves. And so the subtitle of this book, An Unconventional Success Plan for the, highly creative, secretly sensitive, and wildly ambitious, that really, really took a lot of guts for me to put out there because so many people did not like secretly sensitive. And yet the people who are my readers are like, oh, how did you know? That is
Where have you
so
been my
me.
whole
Yeah,
life?
exactly.
Well, and again, as somebody who works behind the scenes in publishing, I'm going to guess the publishers were like, how do I want to find lookalike books. I want to pigeonhole your book as being a part of this space. And so, with that kind of a response, it says to me that you were finding a niche that maybe others weren't willing to go into or didn't see the need there. So, I can definitely understand the pushback kind of out of the gate, at least that you would have seen from publishers. In terms of I'm curious. I wasn't going to ask about this, but since you brought up that you were agented, working with an agent to get a traditional publishing deal versus self-publishing. Like I know many entrepreneurs who be like, I'm going to just bootstrap it and do everything on my own. And it sounds like in your music career, you initially started kind of bootstrapping and doing some of your own stuff. So in terms of choosing to work with an agent and go the traditional publishing route, would love to just hear a little bit about why you chose to make that part of your journey. Because right now the popular thing seems to be let's just do it all on our own.
Hmm. That's a great question. Well, with music, I really wanted to get a record deal. Like that was what I started out on. And then I got offered a record deal. And when I really examined it, I trusted that part of me that kind of went ick. Like I was making very good money on the road and not like millions and millions, but I was really doing well selling CDs. And I realized how good I was at selling CDs from the stage. And I was going to take a huge pay cut to work with a record label. And I made that decision, and that decision made me more of an entrepreneur. Like, it just made me so much more tuned into business, and I started to really focus in on the business side of things, and that taught me so much about growing out of my little artist, diva self. When it came time to do the book, I totally thought to myself, "I'm just gonna self-publish it." But when I met this publisher, I'm sorry, I met the agent and he said, send me your proposal. And I had already known what a nightmare proposals were to write. And I sat down with myself and I said, "Do I want to take the time to write a proposal?" And I guess the thing for me was the exercise of doing it just from the marketing skill set, writing that proposal. It took about 3 months before I sent it to him. He loved it. And then it took about 6 months more to dust it off and polish it up and do all the right things. The process was a really good learning experience. But what he and I talked about was he said, "I have told more authors than not to go self-publish." And he said, "I think this book needs to be published, like through a publisher, because of its content, because it's so unique." And I had to really weigh that out because I love self-publishing. I
Right.
mean, I loved doing it. I had loved being my own record label. And in this particular instance, I didn't have the chops enough to self-publish. And I also didn't have the bandwidth in myself to be able to self-publish. And so I made a decision to just not self-publish on this and put it out there with a publisher. And I get either way, I think is perfectly fine. I have a big enough list I could have done it, but it was nice to have the help and the perspective. And I will say, book publishing it's a skill set in and of itself. It is huge. And it's overwhelming too.
Yeah. Well, and the dirty little secret of self-publishing is you get to wear all the hats. I mean, when you don't understand the behind the scenes working of a publisher, you've got people that run the warehouse, people that order things, people that market, people that write copy, create graphics, acquire books, all the things. Versus if you're self-publishing, you do get to wear all those hats. I think a lot of it though, in terms of whether or not it can make sense, it has to do with what your goals are as whatever space you're in. In my context, it tends to be people who are itinerant ministers and speakers versus if you're somebody with a business or a course you're selling, whatever it might be. It really depends on your goals. If your goal is to get a book out in 6 months and you're going to sell it at your speaking events and whatnot, then self-publishing is a fantastic route because you need to turn it fast and you're going to be out front selling it to people. So that's not unlike what you talked about with your music career. I feel like that's a perfect circumstance. If if the vision is a lot broader, or you don't have the bandwidth, or you need the editorial, creative, marketing support, sales support, all the things that go into working with a traditional publisher, it's harder to pass that barrier to entry. It's going
Mhm.
to be a longer road because the average traditional book is published 12 to 18, sometimes 24 months or more after a contract is signed. So you as the author have to be really patient because often the book comes out sometimes a year or more after you wrote it.
And let's
Uh,
be honest, most entrepreneurs have zero patience,
right.
myself included. I By the time this thing came out, I was like, wow, I could have launched 14 programs in this time. And most people who have their own coaching company would have. It's just, it does take time. And it's good sometimes to go through a process that involves a little bit of tediousness, a little bit of patience. And I don't regret any of it though. It's been very, very eye opening for me. I have a whole new respect for authors.
Well, and I like what you talked about in terms of how the book proposal writing process grew you and stretched you. I feel like it forces the author to really refine what they want to do with the message. And then just the back and forth of working with a traditional publisher and editors, you become better as a writer and as a communicator. I have some friends I'll tell, hey, go ahead and self-publish just to go through the experience and understand everything that goes into making that book. But if anybody ever has the opportunity to work with a traditional publisher where there's just that normal stuff going on. It really stretches you and grows you in ways that you would never be stretched as somebody who's only going after self-publishing. So fun. Thank you for
Well,
sharing.
just
Uh,
yeah, and just one more thing to say, like when someone goes to your podcast, you do the podcast, but then you write why someone should go listen to the podcast. So I tell my
right.
clients, like, don't just write a blog post. You part of your checklist of any content is you write the content, but then you got to write the whole blurb about why someone needs to go read your content. And they once they realize that, oh, it's not just about like putting blog posts out there now. Like maybe at first it was. Now here's why you would want to go read this. Here's why you would want to go listen to the podcast. And writing a book proposal is saying, here's why you would want to read my book or publish my book. And that is a muscle that is so hard to exercise and it takes so much training. That was like a deadlift for me, double body weight deadlift. That was so hard,
Well,
but
and
so good.
and that's the thing. Like it's sort of that elevator pitch mentality. can you communicate why this message is important in just a few sentences in, 45 seconds or less? And if you can't, you're going to have a real hard time getting somebody to be excited about whatever it is, your blog post, your podcast, your book. So a lot of that is just and honestly, it happens in the book proposal process. You have to refine into a paragraph or smaller what this is about, why it's important. So,
Yeah.
yeah, those same skills definitely apply to promoting things on social media.
Hmm.
We're recording this in January of 2021. This is the time of year many of us are setting goals and forecasting and planning what's on the horizon for the new year's. So, in terms of like traditional goal setting models, we've all read a million business books and we see so many of the same things. From your perspective, especially working with highly sensitive and creative people, how do those traditional goal setting models kind of fall flat for people whose minds just don't work that way?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So what I teach people to do, I use a lot of intention, and everyone wants to say, well, what's the difference between, goal setting and an intention? And the way I see it is that intention is, I mean, the way I define it in the book is that it's desire or dream or destiny. So the 3 Ds: desire, dream, or destiny. And what happens is you fuse it with your energy, your attention, and your focus and your direction. So you're leading this thing in a direction somewhere. You're not saying, I'm going to lose 20 pounds by this time, this date, which I think can work for some people, but doesn't work for a whole lot of people, as we both know very well. But to that end, in terms of the new year, is that I have a whole exercise I do with my all my peeps, which is choosing a word of the year. And I started blogging in 2006, and I wrote about this in 2006, and it went kind of viral. I think I was one of the first people to write about it, and I now turned it into a little tool that people can do at yourwordoftheyear.com. You can download the tool. It's a whole little exercise I walk people through. But the reason why I think that works is that it creates something a little bit more aspirational as opposed to motivational, where it becomes something you can live into. And the way I teach goals and intentions is that we set goals, we set intentions, not just for what we can get, but for who we can become. And when you described, when we both have talked about our journeys of like choosing a different trajectory in our lives, the gift of what happened in that hard time of people not being happy with me becoming a musician and me holding on to that intention was who I became. So by the time I got the kudos and by the time I was living the dream, I had become somebody who could own that as opposed to trying to grab the outcome. And it's subtle, but it's a very different energy involved. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense. And in terms, I like that word of the year concept, in the sense like it's almost creating like a one word mission statement, if you will, or just a core theme. I think of in terms of trying to get someplace interesting in life and business. We set aspirational things to pursue, and I feel like sometimes having a word of the year gives us a helpful lens to filter everything through to go. You know what, that is incongruent or it's disconnected from the word of the year or what I want to be about for the next 12 months. So I feel like that could be a real helpful way to sort of process things that we should maybe say no to for the year that we're in, because it's just not part of the journey we're aspiring to be on
Yeah.
in the new year. Really like
Yeah.
that.
I used to on the blog, the next year, starting in December, I used to open my blog up to guest posts from people who used word of the year throughout the year, and the stories were unbelievable of people choosing a word and how that word led them and guided them and challenged them and grew them. And the results people created without setting resolutions and goals was huge. And it was almost as if they had anchored to a force that was bigger than their little brain and their little mind, setting the little like ridiculous little goals, and they opened up. And it's whatever force you believe in took over and led them. And it's very powerful.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to the power of affirmations, keeping things in front of you. You think people, post their word of the year or whatever it might be on their bathroom mirror, in their
Yes.
car, it's on their home
Yeah.
screen, on their phone. And, you know, putting that in front of us constantly, I feel like it does something in us subconsciously where our minds are constantly working on those things, even when we're not trying to. And then we have those shower moments where we're like, bing, this a brilliant idea comes up in the shower. And hey, magically it relates to our word of the year, but we're focusing in that on that very intentionally. So I like
Yeah.
that. That I can see how that would be a helpful practice to pursue every single year.
Well,
Uh,
yourwordoftheyear.com, you can go check it out.
we will be sure to link that up in the show notes for
Okay.
this episode. One of the things I think about in terms of all the business books I've read through the years, I think your book is one of the first books I've encountered that actually has positive things to say about being a creative, sensitive type of entrepreneur. Most of the time, we have books that talk about grit and crushing and 10xing this and 100xing that, which scares the heck out of creative, sensitive people. They feel like they don't want to do any of those things. But in terms of maybe the broader entrepreneurial culture, how do we maybe need to reframe and see some of those underappreciated skill sets more as superpowers for a different part of our family? Maybe our cousins are just really good at these things, and we should let them be all about those things. Because the traditional mold is all these supercharged power words, and we don't sometimes give. I feel like this other side of entrepreneurship enough credit for the value that it brings to the table.
Well, I think one of the things that first off happens is that when somebody is a little bit more creative and a little bit more sensitive, what part of their makeup is that they're very receptive. So they take things in. And sometimes they haven't learned how to really stand in who they are and own that. And so when they see things like the pop word now is everything has to be scaled. And like you said, 10x. And there's this sort of confusion that comes of like, oh, do I need to scale? And oh, I guess I need to 10x and I need to, and to really tune back in and say your business is however you want to be it. I'm not against somebody wanting to 10x. I have a very dear friend who flies to see me private jet and wants more and more and more every year. And the real gift is starting to say, I get to do this the way I want to do it. And I've had, like I said, I've had clients who have built companies and that's wonderful, but not everyone wants to scale. Not everyone wants to 10x, and not everyone does things with exclamation points and crushing things. And I think to be able to own who you are, it doesn't mean any one way is a superpower, but I do think we are at a time now where trusting in your capacity to do it the way you need to do it, trusting when something feels wrong, it probably isn't right for you, and really, get coaching when you need it, but don't ever let somebody tell you what to do. And this has to be the way it is, and this is the way we do it in business, because the playing field has opened up. We already know that, and so you get to do it the way you do it, and do it smart and right. But the superpower here is that this type of person typically knows what's right for them and typically hasn't learned how to trust it, and so learning how to understand all the signals is a key piece to becoming an entrepreneur. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that's that's a long-winded way of sort of trying to answer your question.
I love the long answers. I think we're kindred spirits. I often finish up answers to questions with authors. We're like, I think I answered your question. It was just a real windy path to get there. But I think in terms of like you were talking about with the book that you wrote, I think in the same way, running our businesses or ministries, whatever it might be, they need to be run in a way that brings us joy, that fits with our skill sets, and that we go to sleep at night feeling accomplished and great about what we did. Um, we never want to write somebody else's book or run somebody else's business because you were maybe doing it in a way that's just not true to who we are. So to be able to operate our businesses, just like you talk about writing a book in a way that is distinctly you and brings you joy, why shouldn't we pursue that? You only get
And
one life to live, so why not?
there's also so much me tooism out there, like me, and I'm not talking about the whole me too
Right.
movement. I'm talking about the, oh, well, that person, like in the music business, it showed up as, well, that person's really big now. You should write songs like that person. And, or, oh,
Copycats.
that book came out and we should write books like that book. And it is so easy to say that worked for that person. And especially in the internet marketing world, it's like, oh, do funnels and oh, do this and do this. And everyone I see constantly of just running around, grabbing and hoping to God this will work, and everyone's trying to be this other person, and it is so hard to stop and look within and do the work And that's like partly why I wrote Soul Sourced, was because of, in the very opening of the book, I talk about this business strategist, former military, the guy who said, here's how it's supposed to work, looking at my P&L statements, looking at me because he'd met me a few times, and he just started going, how are you so profitable? And I joked with him and I said, I'm going to use the word soul now and you're not going to like it. And he got this like look on his face, but I really said I've learned to tune in to who exactly I am, and that's what the book's about. It's really about how you tune into who you are, how you get led by a force that's a little different, and then you use all the stuff that comes up and the challenges along the way to teach you. It's because it's not to say that you just, oh, you just trust and it'll all work out. This can be really rocky territory, but it's what makes you a grounded, centered, focused, very successful entrepreneur.
I want to pull on another thread related to kind of the new year, new me, new year, new you mode in terms of getting rid of clutter and distractions that kind of sap our energy, sap our creative power. And that doesn't just mean our office space or
Yeah.
the noise around us. That can be people, relationships, all sorts of things. So, and the reality is you can do this any time of the year. But hey, it's January, so we should at least tie it to the new year. So in terms of getting rid of those things that pull us from that, deep flow state of work, how do we get rid of those things?
Well, first off, there's this whole section in my book, and it's about, I call it your business backstage. And so I talk about how people say they want one thing, and I, I tell a story about what I call chaotic vibration, where you say you want one thing, but the things in your life are vibrating at a different level. The way you live your life is vibrating at a different level from what you want. And the story I tell in that book it was my own story with when I was working with my first mentor, and he discovered that I had a lot of stuff in my basement, and I had a whole bunch of furniture I'd purchased at yard sales and Salvation Army and everything when I first moved to Asheville, and I was starting my music path. I was broke. I was trying to waitress. Asheville wasn't the boom town it is now, and I had bought all this stuff, and then when I started getting more successful as a musician, I put it in my basement. And when he started talking with me about, why is this there? And I said, because I'm scared if my music does, and I had to confess this to him, if music doesn't work out, I might need it someday. And he just went on this big tangent and he said, energy doesn't lie. So, what you are essentially telling the universe is that plan B is there. If you don't succeed in music, you're basically saying, I'm not going to succeed because I'm keeping this stuff. And what he said was, there is a vibration that is different. You're saying, I want one thing, you're living a different way. So, when we clear out stuff, he made me get rid of that furniture. And I was terrified. Like, it was wild to watch how scared I was, because I was essentially saying, I believe in myself. And so when we look in our world and we have clutter and we're holding on to things, usually it's either out of fear, it's out of shame, like, well, I bought this thing, I never use it, I don't care about it, but I spent so much, or I got it on sale, or I used to be thin. All these reasons that are out of vibration with who we claim to want to be. And so, one of the best things you can do, the easiest places to start is with environment. Because in your business backstage, I have you look at your environment, I have you look at people, and all the things. It's so hard to start with people because it's scary to like let go of toxic people in our lives. But stuff in your life that no longer serves you, that lamp that you keep having to futz with that won't turn on, or the plant that you were given and you never really liked and you don't know how to, just letting stuff go is the gesture that says, my energy matters so much in my life.
Well, next I want to talk about one of the things that I think can be really overwhelming for people, especially in the early stages of entrepreneurship, and that's decision making. We can get to a place where there's kind of decision making fatigue because there's so many things to figure out early on, and then once life gets busy in your business or your ministry, whatever it might be, there's all kinds of things to figure out and decide. I feel like there are certain decisions we avoid wanting to make because we're kind of scared or whatnot. So we'll make them in seasons of we can't avoid them or out of desperation or even out of fear. We're making them out of fear. So in terms of getting into that place where we can make good decisions for good reasons? How do we transition out of when we don't know what we're doing with making decisions to being in like a really solid, accomplished place of making decisions?
That I mean, that is the question. I think first off, one of the things that you have to realize is that you get better at decisions by making decisions and seeing where did you make that decision from? Did you make it out of fear or did you make it out of future? Like, did you anchor to your intention? So the way I teach decisions, first off, is I call decisions intentions with legs, because we can set intentions all we want. And when you set an intention, the common belief is that the intention will manifest, but the intention doesn't manifest. The intention manifests as two things, one of two things. It's either a challenge or it's an opportunity. And so when you have, let's say, an opportunity placed in front of you, oftentimes we don't make the decision, or we say no to it, or we shrink back from it because we make decisions from like where we are. We look around and we go, "Oh, I'm not ready for that yet." But when we make decisions that are intention based or future based, we're anchoring to this thing that we supposedly want. And when we can say, all right, I'm going to make a decision because it is connected to this intention, that's when we can start to feel the fear is still there, but when we know when we're really in the energy of the love that we had when we created that intention. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Makes total
So
sense.
it's not about always trying to make the right decision, because that just keeps us, it makes decision making feel like a lottery, like there's the win at the end or there's the not. We have to follow through on our decisions and see where they lead us, because typically a decision just leads to more decisions and we just keep moving forward. And I think that is where we have to get guided by something bigger than just ourselves. And I love the word ministry. I love that you used it in this so much, because it's more than just a business. There is something very big with that, and it comes very connected with a bigger energy than just this mind making decisions. It really is letting that intention guide you.
Yeah, well, and I like that. Some, like you said, some decisions might lead to challenges. Maybe it leads to opportunities. Maybe the opportunities on the other side of that challenge. But the reality is, we can't just stay stuck in one place. Eventually, we do have to make a decision. And so, as we gain experience and make good decisions, bad decisions, and we see what's on the other side, that will train us to be able to have the wisdom and the experience to make better decisions further down the road. But that all starts with actually taking a step and making a decision. Couple last few questions as we begin to move towards wrapping up.
Mhm.
I always like to ask an author to share about kind of the reader's journey with the book. They get to that last page, they close that back flap. How is life different? How do you hope you've impacted them, challenged them? For you as the author, what does success look like with where the reader ends up on that side of the journey?
For me, it is the feeling of relief in that they feel seen, and they suddenly feel like, oh, I get to do this differently. And then they realize I'm not a freak. And oh, I actually have someone speaking my language. And when my readers close the book, they have a whole toolkit, because they can go download a whole big toolkit that comes with it, and what I call thinking tools, in terms of how to think about their business differently, how to set things up. But the biggest thing that I've heard and that I know is that feeling of like, oh, that relief feeling of I can do this.
One thing I always like to do when I discover that an author has a podcast is to make sure that I mention, because hey, we're talking on my podcast. So if the listeners go out to Spotify, iTunes, and Apple Podcasts, it's no longer iTunes for the podcast, and they subscribe to the Soul Source Business Podcast, what can they expect to encounter there?
The same kind of thing of a feeling of, oh, there's a different way to do business. It's not crushing it. It's not 10xing. It's not scaling it. It's actually really trusting myself and taking a different perspective on all of the stuff that no one talks about in business, which is the softer side of things, and understanding ideal clients at every angle, not just, oh, put your avatar out there, and understanding goal setting at a different angle. So everything is sort of that other side of it. I like to turn things upside down and look at them and talk about it from my clients' perspectives, from my perspectives, and sharing stories, and very, very I'm very, very transparent in a lot of the challenges I've had to face. And I get very, very explicit in terms of sharing the kinds of things I've had to go through and clients have had to go through. And I always change the names and situations of my clients. But I think they'll also find that feeling of liberation and relief as well.
Well, I love that you're willing to share the good, the bad, and the ugly because business, like anything else, it's messy, it's real. There are mountaintop times and there are valley times, being kind of eyes wide open as we consider stepping into something, learning from other people's experiences. That's just a benefit to us, so we can, hopefully maybe stand on the shoulders of somebody else who's had to go down some difficult trails. Maybe we can avoid some of those hard places. We will definitely have our own as we're on the journey, but I always feel like we can definitely learn a lot from anybody's journey, regardless
Mm.
of where they've gone in business, ministry, whatever it might be. Christine, in terms of people connecting with you, finding out more about your business, your book, your podcast, where do we discover you on the web?
Well, the book is on Amazon, The Soul Sourced Entrepreneur, but you can also go to soulsourcedbook.com and read more about it if you're not quite sure what this is all about. And then my website is christinekane.com, and that's ChristineKane, not to be mistaken with the minister Christine Kane.
Yes, not to be confused with the Christine Kane in my Christian publishing space that I work in.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, like we do with every episode, we'll have links in the show notes, places where you can connect with Christine and pick up your very own copy of this new book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation today with Christine Kane. Once again, our book today was The Soul Source Entrepreneur, an unconventional success plan for the highly creative, secretly sensitive, and wildly ambitious. Again, if you want to find out more about Christine, a great place to start is her website. You can find that at christinekane.com. And again, that's ChristineKane.com. And Christine, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor to have you on the show.
Shaun, thank you so much.